So before I get a little more into the subject, I would like to clarify the definition of what is considered a historical LARP in France, because you have very different kind of manifestations. So from now on, what I will be describing are actually historically inspired LARPs, meaning the kind of event that you can attend even if you have no prior knowledge of the history. Historical LARPs, French historical LARP, therefore, can be defined this way. Since they are LARPs, the historical context is going to be important, but the main focus will always be on characters, intrigues, and story developments. A very important aspect of LARPing in France is the narrative. You come in LARP to live through a story. Comparing to what you said about historical LARP in Norway, so we don't do the day-to-day mundane thing. We are here to create a story and to live a story most of the time. So because they are only historically inspired LARP, we can work with a loose historical accuracy. I will develop more on that. So you can have some LARPs tending towards the realistic, but some may incorporate fantastic elements, and we even have actual uchronias. So you can have the whole range of it, from the more realistic to the more fantastic. LARPs in France are usually short in duration, ranging from 14 hours to usually a maximum of 36 hours. There are exceptions, but this is a general rule. There are also small, or smallish at least. You have a lot of small format, just 20 players or so. The bigger format in historical LARPs would have between 60 to 80 players, and usually there are no bigger than 150 players. Most importantly, characters tend to be exclusively written by the game masters, and free play or character appropriation by players is usually not part of the gaming process. And to finish, some games have tried to work on the master-servant relationships and power issues, but servants are more often usually non-playing characters. Because what I would like to emphasize here is that the historical LARP in France is quite popular, but it's not a defined genre in itself. You can have many different approaches and many different style of games. Some which are going to be quite obvious, and some which are very specific to our own gaming culture. And for this, I'm going to make a typology using the three-way model. So it was mentioned before, following the GS model. So it was mentioned before, everyone knows about this. So for the purpose of the demonstration, I will use the gamist, simulationist, and narrativist definition. It's okay with immersion. So this is something interesting. I just make a small digression here, because in the French perspective, immersion is not a category in itself. It's something that you are going to try and achieve, but the immersion is going to be different from a gamist or a simulationist or a narrativist perspective. But each of these elements can have its own immersion. It's just a manner of approaching the game and approaching communication around the game. I'll take some more time about this later. So here, I don't know if it's cultural or something, but usually we consider immersion as being something separate that you can achieve through different means. Am I clear on that? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so something which I like to call the dramatist, because it's the first or the historical drama influenced by movies or books or fiction. Historical fiction. So for example, to comparisons, this is a game La Malbête, which takes place in 18th century France during the attacks of the beast of the Gévaudan. And with a movie called Brotherhood of the Wolves, which took place at about the same time. Another example, this is a 1920s game taking place in Germany called Dreaming of Absence, which was deliberately inspired by a German movie, Love and Soul. that you can see here. So from this influence, the historical Larp tend to lean towards the historical drama, meaning that the playing characters are considered as protagonists of the story. Meaning that it is still simulationist because the focus is on the cohesion of the characters, but the focus will be on characters' arc and characters' development, but usually organizers tend to insist on the fact that it is important to stay true to the character and to stick with what should be the character's reaction. From this approach, I need here to call about what is called the French style Romanesque genre, which is something very specific, heavily debated within the French community, which I would define so as a Larp where playing character are constructed as the characters of a novel with a strong emphasis on their secrets and tragic past, and whose consequences and revelations are essential to their development. The French Romanesque so has tied to the historical Larp because it often takes place in a historical setting, though not exclusively. But the emphasis here is on secrets, revelations, and emotion that is going to arouse from a confrontational situation and discovering that something that your character believed actually are wrong. And since we've discussed that earlier, the secrets work for the characters, but for the players alike. In this kind of game, transparency is not existence, and transparency is something that most French players are very difficult with because they are used to this kind of game where the surprise is going to be the players as well as the characters.
Do they play to lose?
Yes, absolutely, because the emotions can be negative. Your character can have a tragic end. Your character can end up committing suicide. So playing to lose is actually very important in those kind of games. But emotion is supposed also to be spontaneous, so coming from the surprise and not from a conscious, analyzed emotion. So the first thing in organizing history as a framing device is to know what your setting is going to be. French historical Larp tend to use a lot the tense and troubled time periods of the history because they are considered as a very good element to create drama. Why is that? Because during an unstable, troubled period, your characters are going to be on edge, they are going to be more confrontational, they are going to be uncertain, so you have a lot of potential to create very dynamic histories. Two Larps here, for example, that have taken World War I as a setting, so with very dramatic characters and a very heavy atmosphere, considering the time period. So on the left is the Martyrs' Graveyard, which takes place in 1919 in a village that was completely destroyed by the bombings of the war. And on the right is Rouge Garance, which is a specific color of the soldiers' pants in World War I, which takes place in August 1914, so in the beginning of the war, with here again an emphasis on questioning about how the characters are going to live the beginning of the Great War. Okay, and my last element, so here I'm stepping into the perspective territory because these again are very recent developments. It is asking ourselves how can we develop a character's reaction in a relevant, coherent, but still narratively interesting way. My point here is that some people in the French gaming scene still consider that a historical Larp it is just a historical reenactment with actual characters on it. But in my opinion, we still need to consider historical Larps as they are, meaning as Larp before historical reenactment. And which brings me to, again, to the threefold theory and element that should be important, in my opinion, for calibrating reactions, which is called filtering, diegetic decision making, and steering. I refer to filtering as the process through which the course of action for a character is going to be analyzed according to the gaming approach of the game. By gaming approach, I'm still referring to the three-way approach and GNS theory. More on that later. Meaning that here again, you can just work your character reaction just saying it would be historically accurate to have this or that reaction, because the reaction that you are wanting to have will depend on your gaming approach. If you are on a gamist game or a narrativist game, you are not going to work your character's reaction in the exact same way. More on that. There are two different levels in decision makings, which should be obvious for most people. So the first one is the diegetic decision making, meaning the decision process that is justified by elements present within the LARP universe, whether the character's background or other people. What is important here is usually French gaming culture emphasize about the importance that everything you do must be diegetic. No meta techniques, or they are practically inexistent, and nothing that would come from the player and not from the character. Which brings me to steering. Steering is a notion that most of you probably have, meaning the process in which a player influences the behavior of his or her character for non-diegetic reasons, which can work with transparency, for example. Here again, I emphasize this point because this is practically in existence in French gaming culture. Steering in particular is considered with extreme caution, because for most French players, steering your character for non-diegetic reasons, meaning trying to win the LARP, doing some power play, trying to manipulate the other players. But on the other hand, if you want to tailor your character's reaction to the type of game you're in, you are going to do some steering at some point. Here again, most of the time it is an unconscious process, and all three of these reactions are made together and in experienced players instantaneously. But to me, from a French LARPing perspective, it is important and interesting to challenge our perceptions on this.